Welcome to the Mies Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Sharkey, the founder and CEO of Mies, the culinary operating system for food professionals. On the show, I'll be interviewing world-class entrepreneurs in the food space that are shifting the paradigm of how we innovate and operate in our industry. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Yo, they say art mirrors life with every stroke of the pencil. I'm giving you folks a glimpse into my experiences you could trace like a stencil.
My guest today is the multi-talented Kiki Aranita. Kiki is a chef and a food writer and the founder of a CPG brand called Poi Dog, which is an offshoot of her former restaurant of the same name in Philly. And she's also a fiber artist, which if you don't know what that is, I also didn't know what it was until I met her, but it's really amazing. And she recreates these packaged food brands like fish sauce and Spam and other really cool products out of yarn and other materials that she finds to repurpose. And the art is so good that it's been on display at Philadelphia International Airport and Showfields and Nordstrom's in New York City. And it's just pretty incredible, the creativity and artistic talent that she has. I was introduced to Kiki by a close friend of mine who said I absolutely need to meet her, and she could not have been more right. I was so impressed with her diverse background of skill sets and her ambition and perseverance and creativity. When Kiki closed her restaurant, Poi Dog, during the pandemic, obviously a publication called to talk about the closure, and she did something that, man, I wish I had thought of. Kiki decided that she wanted to write the article herself in her own words. And it was such a bold thing to do, so much so that she was actually nominated for a James Beard Award for the article. So obviously we talk about this and restaurant closures in general and much more in the episode. So I hope you enjoy as much as I did. All right, Mrs. Kiki, so nice to see you today.
You too.
Thanks for joining the podcast. I was pleasantly surprised when our mutual friend, the Brocks, Megan Brock, introduced us. And I didn't know much about you, but when she introduced us, I sort of looked you up a little bit. And then after our last conversation, I left like, holy shit, this is going to be such an incredible conversation because I've never met anybody that's done what you've done, at least the way that you've done. So I want to kick it off just right away. We'll do a little bit of background on you. And then I have some questions I want to dig into to talk about your writing and some of the things that you do with your writing. So maybe just for the audience, may not know about Kiki, a little about yourself, your background, how you got to be where you are today.
I started off in classics, sort of. I grew up in Hawaii and in Hong Kong. I have a parent from each place. And I know we're going far back in time, maybe farther than you expected, but the fact that I have a parent from each place has definitely shaped my current careers. So I majored in comparative literature with classics and Renaissance Italian, started NYU in Florence, and then finished off the rest of my bachelor's here in New York. Was in 2 different PhD programs at CUNY and then at Bryn Mawr, studying first Renaissance Italian literature and then classics, so Latin and Greek. Spent long summers in Rome and in Athens with the American Academy in Rome and the American School of Classical Studies at Athens. And I know this is a little bit sleepy, but my academic background definitely shapes who I am today. I taught a whole bunch, and while I was teaching, of course, I was not getting paid very well. So I worked as a Jäger girl for about 3.5 years. I did wine tastings. I obviously went into bars and danced around in the East Village Halloween parade, encouraging people to consume as much Jägermeister as humanly possible and throwing t-shirts into crowds.
We got to talk about that.
Did I not tell you about this before?
No, you did. I have a note about it and I see it here. It's just smaller in my fonts. But what's the craziest thing that happened during your time as a Jäger girl? And are there still Jäger girls that exist today?
I believe there are still Jäger girls that exist today. I'm actually in touch with a lot of the Jäger girls and dudes that I worked with back in the day. And
there's Jäger dudes as well.
Yeah, there were Jäger dudes, and they were the most handsome male models that you could possibly imagine. And so they have careers now, and they're in LA and doing cool things. And I was the random Jäger girl who didn't want to become an actress or a model. I was very much in classics. And I was a terrible Jäger girl. I wasn't good. I would like hide in the back of bars. Oh my God, I'm so sorry if anybody from Jäger is listening to this, but I would like grade papers in bars. And it was, yeah. And so, okay, so 2 stories from my Jäger days. My very first Jägermeister promotion, I was chased out of a bar by a woman who shouted at me saying that she hated crosses. And the Jägermeister logo, of course, has a stag with a cross over ears or antlers. And I had given her a Jägermeister t-shirt with the Jägermeister logo on it, which had a cross on it. But yeah, she chased me out of the bar screaming that she hated crosses and how dare I give her something with a cross on it. And that was my first night on the job. Thankfully, it got a lot better after that. But going back, I was born in New York, didn't really grow up here, obviously went to college here.
Did you get back in the bar, by the way?
I did go back in the bar and it was fine. Yeah, like everything turned out fine, but it was just like this moment of being like, what did I get myself into? And so I wasn't great at like talking to people about Jägermeister, and I'm probably better at it now than I was when I actually worked for Jäger, but I am an absolute expert when it comes to navigating Manhattan. This was like before I had an iPhone, and I didn't go over to smartphones until like later on in life. So I was stubborn. So I would go travel around Manhattan and go to like all of the different bars and restaurants and event venues with a compass. So that's like my secret trick for like getting out of the subway and knowing exactly where you're going. Like I literally had like a navigation compass in hand on my keychain.
A compass?
Yeah.
I can't say I've ever heard anybody using a compass in Manhattan. That's crazy.
I can find my way like perfectly.
I have to imagine that spending that many years as a Jäger girl or guy, you learn a little bit about people and selling, which obviously you need a little bit about that to own a restaurant. What were some takeaways there outside of don't give a random person a t-shirt with a cross unless you know that they're not an atheist?
I'm still not great at selling. That's something that I never picked up. I think I'm good at telling a story. I'm good at absorbing facts and translating them to people, but that's something that, went hand in hand between Jägermeister marketing and teaching, which was my day job. But I did learn about the flow of restaurants and bars and talking to random people, of course, and not being afraid to get into a conversation if it's about tasting notes. And like, granted, like the Jägermeister wasn't that difficult. I also did wine tastings for a while all over Manhattan, and I worked for a marketing company that did tastings for kosher wines for the Royal Wines conglomerate and Côte d'Rône. So after that, I started working in a wine bar. So yeah, I can talk about wine and liquor pretty easily.
How would you describe the taste of Jägermeister? It's got an anise flavor, right? It's got like a little bit of an anise flavor to it.
How would I describe it as a Jäger girl, or how would I describe it as a human being who is no longer associated?
However, either way.
I would go with medicinal.
No, I want to hear how you would call it as a Jäger girl.
So Jägermeister comes from Wolfenbüttel, Germany, and is comprised of proprietary, very secret blend of 56 herbs and spices. But these all work together and manifest themselves really beautifully in a bunch of different cocktail expressions, such as what we are now referring to as the red-headed sister. That's probably how I would convince you to drink Jägermeister.
Love it. Okay, well, I've been stopping you to dig into that, but you went from learning about classical Greek and Latin languages, which, of course, most chefs, that's what they learn first, is PhDs in literature. Kidding. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about like what you did with that and then sort of how that laddered up to the restaurants. And then I want to ask you about the article that you wrote. You started teaching. What were you teaching? And then how did you get into food?
I taught great books for the most part all throughout the CUNY system. That's what my teaching fellowship had me doing. So I taught at Queens College, John Jay College of Criminal Justice, Montclair, all over the place. And I also taught ancient Greek language in Taiwan for a while to graduate students. That was when I was 26 years old, and that was the smartest that I have ever been in my life because I was using a book that was in English. The textbook was, of course, about ancient Greek, but I was teaching the class in Chinese, and I have never had to do mental somersaults like that ever again. So pretty much since that summer, it's just been downhill. Yeah.
So you were teaching Greek literature in Chinese to Chinese students in America, in New York?
This was in Taiwan, in Taipei.
Oh, got it. In Taiwan. Gotcha.
Yeah. But I also taught great books, Latin. When you're in classics, like, you're actually a pretty flexible teacher. I mean, in classics, like, you call them generalists because you're able to, like, teach, like, all different sorts of topics under the sun, because cradle of Western civilization, basically from, like, history to historiography to literature to language. Like, you're equipped when you go into a classics PhD program, or rather, like, even like after a year in a classics PhD program, you're equipped to teach like all of these different subjects. In Taipei, I was teaching that in Mandarin, and I sort of faked my students out. Like, I went through half of like the first day, and these were long sessions. These were like 4-hour long classes. I pretended that I didn't speak Mandarin so I could see if they were saying anything about me or about the class. It was still the first day, but then I confessed, and that was really fun. But yeah, I had a teaching fellowship at the Fujian Catholic University in the outskirts of Taipei. And I was there for, I think, 4 months. I taught there 2 summer semesters. And then it was amazing. And I came back to the States and taught. No, I didn't teach anymore after that. I went into a research fellowship for my PhD at Bryn Mawr College and moved to Philadelphia. And I really, really missed Hawaiian food. I had spent so long away from home. And while I was at NYU, I visited Hawaii a lot. Like, NYU had like really, really long summer and winter breaks. So I would spend like long months at my grandparents' house in Waipahu. And then when I got back to New York, I was like super homesick. So then moving to Philly, where it's a lot more diverse now than it was 12 years ago in terms of food. So I was really, really homesick. In New York, at least you can like get food that scratches the itch of Hawaii's local food, but in Philly it was a lot more difficult. The largest Asian immigration to Philly was, to my knowledge, was Vietnamese. So you can get amazing Vietnamese food, but you can't get the unique blend of Chinese, Filipino, Japanese food with Hawaiian influences that I missed. So I left grad school, and with my then business partner, and then boyfriend, we opened a food truck. We were both working in restaurants and other food trucks at the time. And one of the worst restaurants that I was working in, the Garden Manger, happened to own a taco cart that he brought to Temple University on a weekly basis. So he had a spot there. He had a commissary, which you need in order to run a food truck in Philly. And he had the tiniest little taco cart. And I bought it from him. Ran the food truck for 4.5 years. Opened a restaurant. We catered a lot as well. Like, we catered really, really big stuff from the get-go, which I was not equipped for. It's like my previous career, like there was so much training involved and there was so much learning. But when it came to my culinary career, it was like trial by fire. It was like, okay, cool, you're catering a several 100-person wedding now, even though you have never really worked a very serious cooking job. Right after we opened the restaurant in 2017, one of our biggest events came like 2 months after. So I was still like training the staff and trying to train myself. And we ended up catering for like the NBA. Look, I don't know anything about sports. So it's when they announce that the players are going to be on the different teams. I don't know what that's called, but I've catered for and fed so many athletes at this point. I still don't understand sports. I just understand what they're supposed to eat.
Well, if it makes you feel better, I don't really either. Other than if you consider poker a sport.
Okay.
Or maybe wrestling, that was a long time
The
ago.
draft. That's it.
Oh, the draft.
NBA draft.
Yeah.
So, yes.
I don't know. When you bought the food truck, in New York, I don't know if it's the same as Philly, it's really, really hard to get a mobile vendor license. It's almost like a black market for it. Is it the same in Philly? Did you buy the license when you bought the truck as part of the deal?
What we had was a catering license, and that gave us the ability to participate in temporary special events. We also had a sidewalk sales license because we weren't like the other trucks. Like, we didn't have to park on the road. We could park on the sidewalk. So that was sort of like a sneaky way of getting the ability to vend on the street. We never got a permanent city spot. So in Philly, there is this thing called the prohibited streets list where you're not allowed to vend. And we realized very quickly that this was going to prevent us from serving our food to a ton of people on the street. So we very quickly got into events so that we were doing like 3-4 events per week. And we also very luckily opened our business when the city of Philadelphia was looking for trucks to vend in high traffic areas. And we got this contract, and it was a 3-year contract. So we could bring our truck directly into the courtyard of City Hall. So we would twice a week drive our food truck through the gates of City Hall, which don't look like a place where you could drive a food truck, and vend to the city workers like right in the very center of the city. So we were extraordinarily lucky to have that contract.
Wow. I don't think I've ever heard that before. That's pretty incredible. Well, you mentioned that there was a lot of Vietnamese influence, but no Hawaiian influence. I mean, I can't think of many Hawaiian restaurants, maybe Leo Yacht Club in San Francisco, but I'd love to sort of dig into like what you think America gets right and wrong about Hawaiian cuisine, and just generally, like, I think what's really interesting about Hawaiian cuisine, which is probably similar to most cuisines, is there's just been this sort of such a long sort of history of immigration of Chinese and Korean and Japanese and Portuguese and Puerto Rican, and that I imagine that what we think of as Hawaiian cuisine is an amalgamation of many different cultures. And I would love to hear from you, just because I'm sure you know a lot about this. And you mentioned to me that no matter what you do when you opened Poi Dog, there'd be no hulu skirts or surfboards or pineapple. What should we know about Hawaiian cuisine that most of us probably don't know?
So the reason why there were so many waves of immigrants to Hawaii, basically starting in the late 1800s, was because of the sugarcane plantations. And my great-grandparents all worked on the sugarcane plantations. So my family's been in Hawaii for a really, really long time, and many plantation families have. This means that for my family and many others, for 5 generations, people have been intermarrying and like cooking together. When you go to my Hawaii family's Thanksgiving, which I hope in future you will, because everybody's invited, it's sort of like a United Nations of food. And you walk into like a local place like Zippy's or any of like our plate lunch places, and there are influences from all over the world. And this can be puzzling to people. My husband is American and Israeli. And I remember when he first came to my food truck and my restaurant, he was like, why are all these foods together on one menu? Like, haven't you heard of like trimming down your menu? And I'm like, no, like this is a very typical menu that you would find like all over Hawaii. Like, I'm not inventing anything in terms of like the dish names or the cuisines. Like, this is, we really do like eat macaroni salad with everything. And we really do like have like our, the Holy Trinity in Hawaii is a meat on your plate with rice and macaroni salad. That is called a plate lunch. And it is served at all times of day. It doesn't have to be lunchtime. I think we were pigeonholed for a while in Philadelphia because lovely food critics thought that we were only a lunch restaurant, even though we were very much not, because we served this holy trinity of a plate lunch. That is what the dish is called. So there are many, many misconceptions. I think the biggest one that I would hear over and over and over was that like, oh, is everything on the menu sweet? And I'm like, no, like, I don't know where you got this idea. If you go on the dessert menu, things are sweet, but not the actual menu. And it's definitely a remnant of tiki culture and the idea that Hawaiian sauces are very, very sweet, where they're not. They're way more diverse than simply sweet. People would come into the restaurant and ask if there's pineapple and everything. And I'm like, I mean, we didn't have pineapple on the menu at all. So we like pineapples, but we just eat them. Like, we don't go and shove them in every form of food that we have. I feel like I need a drink in hand to go on and on and on about maybe a Jägermeister, maybe, but not.
I should have had a Jägermeister at hand for drinking during this conversation. So the restaurant that you opened, Poi Dog, opened for about 7 years, right? 7 years, is that right? Between that and the truck?
Between the truck and the restaurant, we were open about 7 years. The restaurant was opened in 2017. The restaurant was technically open for over 3 years.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, we could definitely chat about the restaurant, but I want to make sure we talk about is something that really stuck with me in our conversation is you closed the restaurant, like many of us have closed restaurants, and I definitely want to talk about what that means, because I think a lot of people don't realize what goes into closing a restaurant. But you, like many of us, when we close a restaurant, got a call from a reporter, journalist, that was going to write a story about the closing. And instead of having them write the story, you said you wanted to write it yourself, which sounds so novel and maybe innocuous to some, but for me, I'm like, holy shit, why didn't I think of that? That's genius. I mean, I wouldn't be able to write it as well as you had by any means. Was it just because of your background in literature and writing that you thought like I should write this? Or did you really want to own the narrative? Was there something that you just had to get out? So when you closed the restaurant, you decided that you'd rather own that narrative than the journalists?
Okay, so I wrote two things about the closing of the restaurant. First was for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I had previously written a few things for the Inquirer, so I knew the editorial team, and I knew that they were going to put out the news of our closing because, pat myself on the back, it was very big news. The closing brought blocks of people like lining up, early pandemic. Basically, I knew it was going to be big news, but since I was going to be first announcing it with the Philadelphia Inquirer, I wanted to make sure that I was the one to write it. I had a relationship with them, but also when we first opened, the food section of that newspaper referred to us as a Hawaiian themer. I don't think of themer as a word that should be used, and I also wanted to make it very, very clear that my culture was not a theme. It was not a restaurant concept, but I don't even need to articulate it because it's so ridiculous. So I wanted to make sure that when we closed, nobody called us a Hawaiian themer.
Yeah, it's borderline racist.
Yeah. And the only way that I could see going through this was to write my own obituary for the restaurant and also to direct people reading the article to the businesses of my staff. Significant businesses came out of the closing of Poi Dog. I had extremely talented staff, colleagues, people I've been working with for the last 7 years, and they've gone on to open their own restaurants, to start their own businesses, and I wanted to draw attention to that. So when we closed, we made the decision that instead of selling our restaurant equipment, we wanted to donate it to people who could use it to start their own ventures. So the initial point of the article was to be like, this is what we accomplished with Poi Dog, the restaurant. Please pay attention to our staff members who are going on to great things. And third, if you are a person of color and a person who is cooking an underrepresented cuisine, please get in touch with us. And here is a way for you to sign up to get our fryers, our stoves, our ovens, and like all of this stuff. So I feel like we did a really good job of closing. I think we did the best that we could and sort of carried on the Poi Dog legacy in a good way with these goals. And then after that, after the closing, Food and Wine contacted me and asked to interview me about this closing. That's when I went to them. I had never written for them before. And I asked them if I could write the article about how it felt to close my restaurant.
Why did they? Why do you think they said yes?
Why didn't Food and Wine say yes?
I imagine maybe no one's ever asked that before,
Right.
but you had never written for them. I guess you had a background in writing, but
Yeah.
when they reach out and the journalist is like, this is my job is to write about you, and now you want to write. Why do you think they said yes to you?
I'm not sure. I mean, I definitely made a case. I was like, hey, I'm a published author in like multiple fields. Can I please write this myself? And it took a few days for them to get back to me. But eventually they were like, okay. And they let me write it.
Kiki, I think it really is so commendable. You don't get what you don't ask for. I don't know if anybody's ever asked for that before or thought to, but it's so smart and it's also really brave. And I read the article. I loved it. And I want to talk about that part of it because I think that's something that we don't talk about enough is like what it means to close a restaurant. Obviously, it's a baby of ours, right? When we have a restaurant, especially if you've had it for long enough. I've closed restaurants before, and I've had restaurants for 8-9 years where I saw kids where parents whose children were born and brought them as infants all the way to now they're throwing away their recyclables at age 9, in the restaurant. And I see them growing up, and it's a tough thing, especially for the community. But there's also all these other little things that we don't talk about. Obviously, you have to pay vendors. Oftentimes, you have personal guarantees with some of these vendors if you haven't opened in a way where you don't need to do that. For me, there's all these fixtures, signs, or neon signs, or things that you had designed just for the restaurant that now, where do those go? And where do you store them? Your crew find work and all the recipes for the restaurant. What do you want to do with those? And I'd be curious to hear like some of the things that the nuances of closing for you that you didn't sort of plan for, didn't think about, that came up as you had to close the restaurant?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have closed if it wasn't for the pandemic because you have to deal with so much stuff. Where do you put all this stuff? And it's really infuriating and it's really boring. Opening a restaurant is exciting and there's a billion things to do and you have to-do lists all over the place. We have shopping lists. Closing a restaurant is sort of like that, but in reverse. So much paperwork, contacting vendors, and also like I closed at the height of pandemic. So most of my sales reps from like all the different to-go apps, they were like no longer at their jobs or working with like my seafood company, like everybody. And again, we served a lot of fresh poke. So seafood was like a really big part of my life. There was so much staff changeover at that time, like getting a hold of somebody to like end your contract so you weren't constantly paying them was so hard. And I think that even now it's hard. Like closing for me in 2020, like the last 3 months, like that was pretty much like a full-time job, trying to like round up equipment that was rented and had to go back to services. Like shutting down is so much work. I felt like I was like a forensic detective of sorts because I kept trying to like find people to end our contract. And then the legal and sales side of things, I don't know how it is in other states, but Pennsylvania is kind of a mess when it comes to closing down a business. You need to do so much to like shut down an LLC. You have to like, make sure that you are tax compliant. And then sometimes like if you shut down your payroll, they don't transfer your tax information, even though you paid your taxes, to the proper bureaus. And then you have to like find evidence that you paid your taxes. I literally just had to do this a month ago and I closed 3 years ago. Stuff is so slow.
Did you have any personal guarantees with any of your vendors?
No, I did not.
Oh, that's good. With one of my restaurants, I ended up having to pay way more money personally than I would have. I think that's another thing people don't realize is, when you close, there's a hierarchical of just making sure everybody gets paid. You have to make sure your employees get paid and your vendors get paid, and closing out, leases and things like that. It's a mess, and it is so much, organization to do. And it's like this work that you have to do, but you really just want to be done and have closure. So you're right. Sometimes it takes years. What do you think are some things you would maybe have done differently, if anything, about closing? You could do it over again.
Like I said, I feel like we did a good job closing. I think I wouldn't have done anything differently, but I would have girded my loins a little bit better for knowing that closing an LLC and getting like the legal and tax side of things wrapped up will take years. I have an amazing bookkeeper who thankfully keeps amazing records that are all stacked in my basement. Thankfully, I have a basement and I have a lot of storage space, and I didn't hang on to a lot of stuff. Like we donated so much. If it's one piece of advice I can give people is like, let go. Anything can be replaced. Don't have to-go containers stacked in your basement. If you don't plan on opening another restaurant soon, like just get rid of the stuff. Like you can get more of it. It'll be fine. It'll make more money.
I did the same for quite a while and then gave it away. So you closed, you wrote an incredible article that talked about why and what it meant, and it was a bit of an obituary. And then you started doing a lot more writing. So you're writing now for the Fine Dining Lovers column, right? Can you maybe talk a little about what that is and what it means to you?
Yes. We are on hiatus right now because of budget issues. It's funded by San Pellegrino.
San Pellegrino, you guys got money. Come on.
Well, they also lost a lot of money during the pandemic. I'm so sorry, guys. And knowing the inner workings of a water company has been really, really fascinating, especially like if it pertains to your life in any sort of functional way. Yes, they have lots of money, but there like a lot has happened in the last 3 years. It's just a matter of like coming out budget, which I also understand as a business owner. So I had my own column, currently have maybe my own column where San Pellegrino's Fine Dining Lovers, where I get to write about cool things that I noticed in the food world, which has been such a gift. And I'm so thankful that I had basically free reign to write about trends and like flavor combinations and people who were doing amazing things in the food world all over the world. I got to write about like Indigenous Canadian cuisine. I got to interview David Dilber about new frontiers in fermenting garum, which of course tied things back to my classics background. I got to do so much cool stuff with this column.
Yeah, I have to imagine there's so much joy you can get out of it, not just the writing piece of it, but how much you learn. I read some of these articles. The one about rice with Angie Branca was awesome. I was inspired to cook some more coconut rice that night. Do you feel like you have sort of been able to replace the joy of cooking with the joy of writing, given the same vertical?
I'm very compartmentalized in my life and in my brain, and they're two very different sides of me. Like I have to decide which day I'm going to be a cook, like which day of the week I'm going to be a cook and which day I'm going to be a writer, and basically turn into a different person depending on the day. I do cook a lot. I had a lot of chef residencies kind of all over the place, and with how Poi Dog, I turned it into a sauce company. I'm still doing a lot of cooking demos. I never really stopped cooking. If anything, I'm cooking more now than I did when I was running the restaurant. Because when I was running the restaurant, I was in the office doing the paperwork and yelling at people on the phone gently.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I'm also I didn't tell you this. I took a temporary job as a private chef because Martin Brock is doing it. And I figured if Martin Brock can do it, I can do it too. It was offered to me.
With the same family?
No.
As Martin's?
With an athlete in Philly. So I spend 2 days a week right now, doing all of the prep and cooking like crazy in ways that I haven't done in a very long time. And it's nice to flex those muscles. I keep the cooking and the writing very, very separate in my brain.
This podcast is brought to you by Mies, the culinary operating system for food professionals. As a chef and restaurant owner for the past 20 years, I was frustrated that the only technology that we had in the kitchen was financial or inventory software. Those are important, but they don't address the actual process of cooking, training, collaboration, and consistent execution. So I decided if it didn't exist, I'd do my best to get it built, so the current and next generation of culinary pros have a digital tool dedicated to their craft. If you're a chef, mixologist, operator, or generally if you manage recipes intended for professional kitchens, Mies is built just for you. Organize, share, prep, and scale your recipes like never before, and get laser-accurate food cost and nutrition analysis faster than you could imagine. Learn more at www.getmies.com. What I love most about the personal chef gig is that it really is at least for me, part of what I love most about cooking is what we get to do if you're a personal chef. Because when you're a chef in a restaurant, it's a different type of joy. It's also a different type of skill set, right? Because there you're sort of making sure your cooks are executing well and that they are on time and that they're they understand their prep list and their mise en place is set up. I don't know about you, but that's what I love most about cooking is knowing I have this long prep list and organizing the thing and getting my braces on and marinating this and knowing this is going overnight and tasting this and going to sleep knowing that there's all these things that are marinating or sitting or braising or sous videing. And that for me, that there's so much joy out of that. And is what I love most about cooking. We don't get to do that as much when we own a restaurant because we have a team that does that, unless it's just you, which is very often not the case. So I feel like the personal chef is a great outlet for that because you get to do all of that. Unless you happen to have a team, which, some people do as well. But I love that you have this sort of mix of all these things that you do in your life. And you're not just a chef, and you're not just a writer, and you're not just a crocheter and all these things. And to be honest, I'm a little bit jealous and envious because I tend to sort of dig into one thing and just be maniacally focused, almost myopically focused on the business in front of me. And I have this sort of almost this level of guilt if I try to do other things. But you inspire me to no, we got to find time for those other things. So I want to get into those other things.
Can I ask you a question of your clothing though?
Yeah, please.
What did you keep? What could you not get rid of?
Okay.
What is taking up space that you have no use for?
So, well, here's the thing. I didn't keep much, but there's more I wanted to keep. There was signage I wanted. Our restaurants were sort of famous for these neon signs, beautifully designed neon signs. And I didn't have space for them, so I wanted to keep them, but I couldn't. But I did candidly some of the equipment, the Vitamix and the RoboCoupe and things like that. I kept, and I have no qualms about that. I was hell yeah, I'm keeping these. So now I have those in my kitchen still. Otherwise, to be honest with you, I did snag some hotel pans and things like that because I just even in my house at private parties or Thanksgiving, it's nice to have that stuff around, but not much else other than the recipes. I'm maniacal about all the recipes. And so those all live in Mies now, but
That makes sense.
Oh, the one other thing I kept is onesies. So we had these really cool onesies, and I only have like 2 left, but I kept like,
What?
yeah, like they're gifts. So I would give like the onesies to whenever my friends would have a baby, I would give them a onesie. I have 2 onesies left from years ago, and I still have 2 more baby gifts to give, but that was I kept everything else we gave away. But you're right, it was years.
I want to ask people who close restaurants the same question. Like, I feel like we should put out a survey of asking people what they kept from their closed restaurants.
Yeah, that is so funny that you just said that, because I wanted to talk to you about this today because I wanted to hear what you kept. I actually have a note. I should screenshot it, send it to you. I was like, send a survey after this when I talk about Kiki and I's conversation and ask everybody what they kept. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to tag you and we will find out from everybody what they kept, because obviously selfishly, I don't know about you, there was some of the equipment I'm like, I'm not giving this up. Like, I want this. And it was a little bit, I felt bad again because like we sold the restaurant with the equipment, right? So it was like you get all this stuff, but some of it we kept back. But I mean, there's a million learning lessons I had from that I would do differently. The personal guarantees was probably the hardest thing for me because the vendors were important to me. They were like, we didn't buy from broadliners. Every vendor we knew personally, and it was usually a person. So of my own money, I would pay $5,000 to this person and $8,000 to this person because otherwise they wouldn't get paid. And that was a tough one, but part of running the business.
Definitely in a pandemic, we have very different circumstances.
I would sort of bounce back a little bit because when we were talking about your writing, one thing that I think is really interesting about what you're doing, Kiki, is you're a chef, right? You cook. Obviously, you started in academia and literature, but you're clearly, a chef now, among many other things. And I think there's skill sets of being a chef that are applicable to a lot of other things that people probably don't think about. So before I talk about that, though, I'd love to hear from you. Like, do you think that more chefs should write? Like the impetus that you had to say, I want to write this article. Granted, I know you were a writer, so that's probably why they let you do that in the first place. But great chefs, right? We have a perspective, we have a voice. That's the only reason why we're cooking, or at least, it should be. So we want to tell us some story of what we believe in through our food. Do you think that more chefs should write?
My answer is very much a yes. I think much of American food media in the last couple years, and I know this because I've been the grateful recipient of this sort of attention, and many editors think that people should tell their own stories, that chefs should tell their own stories. So I think it is going in that direction. That said, it's not enough. I don't know how closely you read Eater, but they recently put out a list of 5 ways to get a better meal at a restaurant that created a big furor. And because one of those things was like, you should go into a restaurant and ask to sit at a different table after you've already sat down. And I cannot fathom, and many people cannot fathom for the life of us, why a publication like Eater would give that sort of advice. And the only justification I can think of is that editors, certain people on their staff, don't have the sort of back of house experience that lends actual people, front of house or back of house, the sensitivity. That's a terrible idea. There's such a protocol in restaurants of how to behave. And if you're dispensing bad advice, it's because you're out of touch with the reality in these spaces. So if you're writing from within that space, if you're writing as a chef or somebody who has experience in a restaurant, then you're going to dispense better advice to people who are going to come into restaurants in general. So yes, more chefs and front of house people should be writing because they're the ones dealing with it every single day.
So this is sort of the bedrock of and this is by no means, I'm not trying to plug my company, but the foundation of everything that we do at Mies is to this first principle of what we call operational empathy. And it's the same reason why food writing, I think, has that same problem that you mentioned, is the same reason why most technology has the same problem, because we're sort of given this technology from someone that doesn't understand what it means to be in a kitchen, to what a day looks like, why at 11 o'clock we don't have time to do this because there's probably a cook that's running late or a delivery that came in late or something that got burned or something. And that sort of notion of operational empathy is imperative to be able to create great technology. And I think, to your point, it's the same reason why a lot of food writing, especially over the years, has become diminished a bit. I think that one thing that bothers me is when we become sort of this caricature of ourselves in the writing. when someone's interviewing, us as a chef or writing about us, and they're writing about chefs as sort of like a character of what we do and sort of the surface level things of what it means to be a chef. And there's so much more to it. And if you don't know that, it's very hard to really get to the heart of what the story is of why a restaurant closed, of why a chef cooks the food that they do the way that they do, or why it might be different this day than the other day. I don't know how you solve that without people with domain experience write about the thing. I think there's a reason why some of my favorite authors in the world are someone like James Michener, who it's historical fiction, but he's been there, he's living this thing, and then he writes about it. And there's so much knowledge in the narrative that's what actually makes it so enjoyable, is you can sort of trust it. And, not just from a chef's perspective, but from a layman who's not a chef reading this, I think it's really difficult to have great writing about the food if you don't understand why it is the way it is or how it is the way it is. So that's why I asked you if you think more chefs should write, which I think sounds like you do, but I'd be curious to hear from you what you think makes great writing, or maybe great food writing, you choose.
So I do think more chefs should write, but I also think that more people should work in restaurants. So for many, many years, I've been saying that just like how in Israel and Korea, there's a required military service, there should be compulsory restaurant service in America. Like, you should have to put in your time. Like, everybody, it should be like the entire population should be required to put in like a year in a restaurant.
So instead of the military industrial complex, we're going to have the restaurant industrial complex.
Yes. And I think it'll solve so many problems and make people kinder and more empathetic in general. I think compulsory restaurant service should really be a thing in this country.
Yeah, I'm not sure I disagree there. I think you're onto something there, because everybody goes to restaurants, right? So
should we start another campaign?
That's another one. We're doing it. Okay, that one's for another audience, but I'm making a note here. Yeah, I think you're right. Also, just going into sitting down at a restaurant and knowing why you might be waiting is important. So, are there any food writers that or just writers in general, like who do you look up to or aspire to or love as it relates to writing?
I love Rachel Loudon. She is a food historian. She wrote The Food of Paradise. And so she lived in Hawaii for a while, and this book was published by the University of Hawaii Press. But she's very much like conscious of the culture as an outsider. But she writes with like intelligence and clarity, and I love her writing. There's so many food writers that I respect and adore. Mahira Rivers is amazing. I have to keep training myself. So I've known Mahira since we were like 13. Mahira is a very, very accomplished food critic. I cannot talk about how accomplished she is as a food critic, but she's extremely accomplished. She also has a column with Resi. And back when we were 15, we were roommates on our high school interim trip to Cambodia. And yeah, I've known her for so long, it's laughable. She's very, very talented, and she used to do the Hungry City column for the New York Times on Bettina Makalintal. I love her writing as well. She's currently at Eater. I feel like she has a really great finger on the pulse of what's happening in the food world and tying it into popular culture. But yeah, those are the three that come to mind right now.
What do you think makes a great writer?
The ability to make connections, I think. So yes, you can have beautiful writing, you can have beautiful like turns of phrases and put words together in a nice, succinct way. But when it comes to food writing, okay, I have to name one more person. So our food critic in Philadelphia is Craig Laban. I feel like he's one of those food critics that is a special breed. He's definitely old school, but he understands his position best and has to constantly remind people. And I actually interviewed him for an article that I wrote about food criticism and its place for fine dining lovers. But he understands that he is first and foremost a service journalist. His job is to tell people where to spend their hard-earned money. So his job is not to like promote a restaurant or like for marketing or whatever. Like, yes, people use his words and his reviews to market their own restaurants, but he's first and foremost somebody who serves the dining public. And I think that's very important because I think the general public looks at food writing, if they even think about or look at food writing, they don't necessarily know the difference between food criticism, service journalism, and food writing, the sort of food writing that I do. Like, I'm not a critic. I will never walk into a place and write about a bad experience. But both types of writing, I think, are very important. I think like knowing one's role and like tying larger thoughts together into the narrative of food creates amazing food journalism. Every story is a food story. Everybody eats. And I think that food journalism is not niche. Everybody should be reading it. And it's really honestly unfortunate now that so many magazines and publications that produce wonderful food journalism are not budgeted very well at this particular moment in time.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I actually do think that empathy is one of the most important aspects of being a great writer in general, and especially when it comes to food, and being humble. And to your point, I think maybe the most important thing, at least as a food critic, is writing in service of the guest instead of in service of yourself as the writer. I think too often there's like these pontifications and sort of over narrations of a dish. And let's be honest, most of them, they're not chefs. We should value their opinion if they're eating a lot of food, because there's also an importance to have eaten and a lot of food and to have a good sense of taste. I think that's really important, to be an arbiter of taste. But the greatest critics are in service of the guest and not the writing that they're doing. And that probably is one of the biggest sort of dividers that you see. To your point about the Eater article, that plays into sort of the empathy, right? Is the most successful ventures of anything, in my opinion, are things that are mutually beneficial to all parties involved, right? So if you have a marketplace, obviously you want the buyers to be getting value and the sellers getting value. And if you're a food critic, right, you want the restaurant to be getting value and you want the guest to be getting value. And then of course you want, the newspaper or the journal, that whoever you're writing for, to get value. And all three of those have to work, right? It can't just be that the guest and the publication are getting value, and it can't just be that the restaurant's getting value, which also sometimes that happens, right? Where they're sort of writing more in support of the restaurant than the guest. And that's when it works really well, I think, when all three of them are serviced well, because the restaurant should be getting value out of that article because they should learn. It's a chance for them to learn. Hopefully this is a critic that's eaten there many times, because you can't just eat a dish once. You can't have one experience because you could have an off night, we all know. But if someone's eaten there 10 times and then they write about it, and they write in service of the guest and the restaurant, then you do get value of it. It might not be a great review, but you'll learn and you can get better. I wonder if there's a place where chefs end up becoming food critics. Although at the same time, I wonder if food criticism is now just open source to the world, because you just go on TikTok or Instagram and, everybody in the world has an opinion on the restaurant they've been to, and you learn from that.
Yeah, it's important to not just have good writers, but also to have good readers, to understand where that writer might be coming from and why they might be saying the things that they're saying. But it also sounds like what you're saying is, whether you're a chef writer or a critic or a reader, you need to set aside your ego in order to produce the best quality work.
Yeah, I definitely believe that. Well, we've been on this for a while. I want to make sure we talk about Poi Dog, the CPG brand, and I also want to make sure that we talk about your crocheting, which we have some work that you and I have to do on that as well. But let's talk about the CPG brands for a minute. Why did you launch that brand, and how's it going, and what's next? And I have, by the way, you sent me some sauces. They're awesome. And I'd love to hear more about why you started that and what people should know about the brand.
So cooking in a restaurant and at a food truck, I wanted everybody to come and taste food the way that I intended for them to taste it. I constantly referred to us as a mobile gathering place. And then once we were in a brick and mortar, a gathering place for people who missed and loved Hawaii and wanted a piece of it in their lives on the mainland. We drew a lot of different people who loved Hawaii in different ways, whether they had lived there, have family there, or honeymooned there. We valued all of those experiences and wanted to give them a little taste of that. So we were confined by geography, but my sauces are not. My goal for the sauces is to have people create new memories and new dishes with them the way that they want them to taste. So I just want to be a part of that process. And it's been really fascinating. Somebody sent me their home recipe for Bloody Marys that use the guava katsu as a base. And I thought that was so brilliant and something I never would have thought of myself. There's a flexibility to them, and I want them to spur creativity rather than have other people just taste my creations. They can also travel. They can be shipped all over the country. And I wanted them to be found on retail shelves of places that reminded me of Poi Dog and like neighborhood gems, places that you stumble upon and discover new flavors. Like I wanted people to have that experience all over the country, to stumble into a little shop and find my sauces. That's honestly what I want. But I started it because I had an event in September of 2020 after the restaurant closed that required me to make chili pepper water for my dish. And I made a lot of chili pepper water. And it was at this event that my friends Ori and Ethan from Burlap and Barrel were also cooking. And I was very much in grief mode at this point after closing Poi Dog. And they said that they tasted the sauce and they're like, hey, this is great. You should bottle it. I'm like, wait, what? And they were like, yeah, you should bottle it. You should get into CPG and we'll tell you how to do it. So after that, they linked me with many, many different people, like co-packers, people in their orbit, who most of whom gave me like great advice or told me that I'm not doing 500 gallons at once, so they can't help me, but here are ways to like get to that point. So yeah, honestly, it was Burlap and Barrel's idea and I went with it.
That's awesome. Well, thanks, Ori and Ethan. We just had them on the podcast last week, actually. They're great guys.
Yeah, they're wonderful.
Anything surprising that you've learned now about launching a CPG brand that you didn't know? I mean, sure, there's a million things you didn't know, but the most surprising?
Oh, so many things. Like, I don't even know where to start. First of all, it's a totally different style of cooking. You can adjust things when you're cooking on a line. You can fix things. You can be nimble. You can't be nimble when it comes to something that's going to be bottled and shelf stable for 2 years. So the recipe has to be perfect. And then when you scale up, things are going to be different. And when you scale up more, things are going to taste even more different. I mean, I got like a crash course in food science and preservation, in addition to many other things when launching this brand. And I find it continually fascinating. And every production run, I learn more. And the newest sauce, which you were the very first to get a bottle of, is also packaged for food service. So we have a food service distributor as well now, and we are launching that sauce in 3 days.
Wow.
At the Cherry Bomb Jubilee here in New York City.
That's amazing.
I'm very tired. You're the only person who can see me right now, but I haven't been sleeping very much.
Oh, that's not good. How many hours of sleep do you usually get? What's like a typical night?
I mean, right now I'm getting fitful sleep. I mean, I feel like I need like 7 hours. I'm probably getting 5.
Yeah.
Maybe. I fell asleep on the train, which is something I never do, going between Philly and New York these last couple days. I've done that trip a few times these last few days. Yeah, I never fall asleep on the train, and falling asleep is like terrifying to me because I'm like, what if I wake up in Miami?
I don't think that'll happen on the Amtrak, at least. They'll stop you.
Or Savannah. It goes as far as Savannah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they stopped you before. It's happened to me a couple times. Honestly, like the sleep is the toughest thing for me now because I used to not sleep very much, but it was okay. For 15 plus years, I slept 5 hours a night and I was fine. And now I'm 40, almost 42. If I get 5 hours of sleep, I'm struggling that day. And I have 2 kids. And it's funny, I do this sort of daily journaling. And one of the things that I built this sort of app for myself. One of the prompts is just asking me like what I'm stressed about or what I'm worried about. And I just looked at the last like 3 or 4 weeks and it's always just, how do I find a better schedule for sleep? Because I want to get up and work out in the morning before my kids get up. And it's tough. And we definitely like undervalue sleep. I hope you get some soon.
Yeah. And like my body hurt. I also did a pop-up and cooked. So our most famous dish at the restaurant, what we were known for was the mochi nori fried chicken. And I had resisted making it for 3 whole years. And then I did a pop-up at my friend's restaurant in Philly where we served it for the first time since we closed the restaurant in March 2020 for the first round of shutdowns for the pandemic. So I hadn't made this dish in so long and like I was like overthinking it. Yeah.
So you said mochi nori fried chicken. I'm trying to like picture for myself how maybe the nori is dried and part of the spice mix or something. How does that come together? Can you tell me about that dish?
All right. Do you know what mochiko chicken is?
Oh, mochiko. No, I don't.
The rice flour battered Japanese style chicken.
Oh, got it. So like by mochi, you just mean like the rice flour.
So mochi nori fried chicken is a riff on that.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes more sense.
So the rice...
That makes sense.
So it's battered in rice flour. Mm-hmm. And our breading has furikake in it. So it has like the little nori flake.
Yep.
So it's mochi nori fried chicken. Yeah, and we had like lines around the block.
Do you make the furikake or?
No, we use the norikomi furikake. I do make furikake, but not for that chicken.
Great on popcorn, by the way.
Yes, the best. Especially if you like put like shoyu caramel on the popcorn. We used to do that at the restaurant for the holidays.
Ooh, that sounds good.
Oh, yeah. I stole the recipe from one of my aunts and have not changed it.
Wow.
It's very good.
Yeah, well.
It requires no note.
Nothing like salty caramel with umami. Sorry, I interrupted you. You were talking about pop-up and your back hurts because you made some countless number of fried chicken.
Everything hurts. Everything hurts. It was like lying around the block. I have done like the chef residencies, but even with like the residencies, like that's just me telling people what to do and helping with cleanup and basically just telling people what to do. This was like me on the line cooking, and we had a line around the block and we sold out within an hour, even though I'm very well prepared for this sort of thing. And I hurt. My whole body hurts. I'm in so much pain right now.
Epsom salt baths, sometimes that helps. Yeah, I feel you. I definitely feel you. I remember when I hit 30, my back went out. I was like, oh, this is the first. And then I hit 40 and my knees were going out and it just keeps coming.
The recovery time is longer now.
Yeah, a lot more stretching that has to happen too. Like unnecessary, but necessary stretching for way longer than I would normally have needed to. I run like at least 4 days a week. Now I'd run barefoot, which is helpful. It actually is like less pain on my knees.
Wait, do you wear like the foot covers?
No, I wear socks, just like regular old socks, because I run on the road. But I only run like 6 miles, but at a clip.
You run 6 miles barefoot 4 days a week?
Well, no, I run 2 of the days I run barefoot, 2 of them I don't. I try to mix it up because 2 of the days I actually go on these trails where people say they run barefoot. I don't know. I don't want to mess with that. It was hard at first, and it was like I kind of went right for it right away, which I shouldn't have. I should have sort of eased into it because the first time I ever ran barefoot, I had just finished reading this book by Christopher McDougall called Born to Run, which is everybody should read that if you like running. It's an incredible book. He just came out with a sequel, and it sort of like touts the beauty of running barefoot and why we have, as humans, degraded the efficacy of our running because of these cushion shoes that we've had over time, and how Nike sort of like built these cushions in our shoes, which forced us to run in our heels. And anyways, that's not the point of the story, but yeah, I run barefoot. It's much better on my knees, causes much less injuries, and it makes you use different muscles than you're used to. It definitely takes some getting used to get into it. But I still, when I get home, if I don't do like 20 minutes of stretching now, like I'm hurting the next day. Whereas I used to not even have to stretch really when I got done. I would just do a stretch beforehand. And it's one of those things where you just realize this is just getting old, I guess. That was a rant.
Yeah, no, I'm fascinated by the barefoot running thing.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, it does take some getting used to. I will say, like, running for me is the most therapeutic. It's great exercise, but I run to think. I never use like headphones. I never like listen to music or anything. I just, every once in a while I'll listen to a book, but for the most part, I run and I just think. I'm just like solving a problem in my head, or I'm just like thinking about things or enjoying the nature if it's a really, really long run. But for me, like, there's no better way for me to get my thoughts out than running. The barefoot thing started maybe a few months ago, and that was tough because it was hard to think during that time because you're so focused on your form. Now it's a little bit more natural, but I would recommend trying it out if you like running. It definitely helps with form and improving your form.
I hate running.
Oh, well. Then.
I do it. I mean, I don't enjoy it, but I do it.
Well, that's good.
I like swimming.
So, little known fact. Actually, this is not a little known fact for anybody that knows me, but I do not know how to swim. I mean, I can swim from A to B, but if you drop me in the middle of a lake, I will sink like there's no tomorrow. Which
What?
I need to learn because I have 2 kids, and I don't know. I just never really like got it.
Yeah, that's dangerous.
I know.
Dude.
I know. It's like now I feel like I'm just too old to learn, but I'm probably not, and I probably should because I got to make sure I can save my kids if I need to. I feel like if I needed to, I would. Because again, I can swim from A to B. I just can't tread water. I don't know why, but I bet I would love swimming.
You got to do it. It's a safety thing. Like you never know. Like or sorry, a girl from Hawaii. I'm like, what?
I know. Believe me, I know. And I live from the Hudson River, and although I guess you don't really swim in the Hudson.
Oh my God.
Enough about me. Let's talk about crocheting because this is fucking wild. You know, you have this installation at Philadelphia International Airport, and you do. I'm gonna just try to bastardize this a little bit, or not bastardize it, but you crochet these basically like branded food, among other things. But how did you get into it? Why do you do it? Also, I noticed you have squid fish sauce. Why'd you choose that one? How come not red boat or shark or?
I could do red boat. I didn't grow up crocheting. I grew up sewing, and I can do like basic knitting, but I never really connected with it. So when I was running the restaurant and my life was really, really stressful, crochet was my outlet, but I would mostly make like dog sweaters. And then during pandemic, I started crocheting bunnies, but they were like sort of self-portrait bunnies. It was very dark. Like I was in a bad mental place, like crocheting these bunnies. So they would have like carrots impaled through their heads. I did what I called bundusa, the testa di bundusa. So it was a riff on the testa di medusa. So it was a decapitated bunny with like, I painted like blood splatters like coming out off of like the decapitated bunny head. And instead of serpents coming out of their head, it was like serpentine carrots. Then I did like I call it the bun theogony. So like Hesiod's theogony was like basically a compendium of all the different Greek gods and goddesses. So I crocheted a blind bunny, like Tiresias being like with like two snakes like in wrap circling its body. I basically did like all of the Greek myths in bunny form with a lot of, like I said, it was very dark. So it was like a lot of like them being impaled with carrots crocheted from yarn. It sounds really stupid when I say it.
It makes sense. Your background in Greek and Latin literature, that you're doing crochets of Caravaggio or Medusa or something like that. But I really have to ask is, how do you get them to look like what you want them to look like when you're crocheting? I know nothing about crocheting, but do you have to like do a template? You like draw it first, or like how do you do that?
No. So I don't read a pattern. I don't know actually how to read a crochet pattern at all. Like I never taught myself. I do everything freehand, and I do everything with scrap yarn. You know, I'm on a mission to save the world from microplastics, I guess. And microplastics can get into our waterways by washing synthetic yarns, synthetic fabrics. So I collect all the scrap yarns from my neighbors. I have a whole racket going of sourcing yarn from my Buy Nothing group on Facebook, and I turn stuff that would hopefully not land up in the landfill, but could very well. I turn it into sculpture. So I jumped from bunnies to packaging because I have a very, very close and extremely talented friend who's a fiber artist named Caitlin McCormack. And Caitlin was like my buddy through the darkest days of pandemic. And I decided that I would see a thing in my house or see a thing online and make it out of yarn. And I started to do that with brand packaging. Started actually with, my first one was San Pellegrino's bottle. And then I crocheted it and realized that it looked really uncannily like an actual bottle of San Pellegrino. I became fascinated by like the connections between in memory and recognition. So you look at something that's a clear facsimile of the actual thing. It's made out of yarn, and yet you still recognize it as a piece of packaging because you know you're so familiar with this type of packaging that you see like, you know, conglomeration of colors that are similar, and you're like, oh, okay, I know what that is. So I'm fascinated by like the short connectors between familiarity and recognition when it comes to sculpture and brand packaging reality. And I also know that the thing that runs in my family is a short connection between our hands and our brains. So it's a quality that I'm very grateful to have inherited from my dad's side of the family, where if we decide we want to make something, we can just make it. There's no like design process. It's just like, give me some materials and my hands can make it for you, and it will make it exactly the way that I intended it to be. So my practice in terms of fiber sculpture is about these short connections, the short connection between my hands and my brain, and the short connections between recognition and memory. So I started crocheting stuff. I started crocheting the things that I missed. We're all familiar with the dearth of stock in grocery stores during the pandemic and supply chain issues. So I started crocheting the snacks that I missed in Hong Kong that I couldn't get my hands on, things that are really, really iconic in my life. And I started a series that was like somebody else's childhood, because I started gathering like iconic packaging from the childhoods of my friends. Of course, you know, my husband. So I crocheted him a bag of bamba, Israeli peanut snack. I started crocheting the bag of bamba when I was hanging out with Ethan and Ori from Burlap and Barrel in the Poconos while we were talking about starting Poi Dog sauces. So all these things like came together at once. They were like, what the hell are you doing crocheting this orange bag of bamba? And then it started to actually look like bamba. And like towards the end of our time in the Poconos, I started crocheting the little bambas and like seeing their faces like start to recognize bamba, like I'll never forget the looks on their faces as it was like materializing.
Stuff was we're having a conversation right now, so people can't see these things. KikiAranita.com/fiber/art. If anybody, you should look at this while you're listening because it's baffling how you do. I have no idea how you do this yet. I'm looking at these crochets that look exactly like a bottle of fish sauce or a bag of bamba or Spam or something. I'm like, I just can't wrap my head around how you manifest this from yarn. It doesn't sound like something that's easily teachable. It sounds like it's something that comes from, just from your genes, but everybody should go check it out. And on that note, we talked about doing I definitely want to do the Mies Whiz that we talked about with our logo and Cheese Whiz, because that sounds like a really fun gift to give to people. So I have a note for myself to remember to commission you for that after this.
I have 2 shows coming up here in New York. I'm going to be part of a group show.
Oh, cool. Where? At
Bobble House on the Lower East Side. It's like a gallery/retail store. And I'm also planning an installation with Showfields at their NoHo location.
Nice. All right. Well, I'll have to get that information from people. Put it in the show notes. When is that?
The Bobble House one is going to be June and July. And Showfields, I owe them so much information that I am going to get to them at the end of this call. But they want me to crochet something enormous. I hope they give me some time.
Very cool. I'm going to try to make it there. Well, we're wrapping up here. So before we get going, is there anything else that you want to tell the audience of food folks or your friends or colleagues or anything that we didn't talk about that you want to make sure you tell the world?
I just started working with Hone, the talent agency that was born from Whetstone Media. They have an excellent magazine. And I'm not just excited to work with the people behind Hone, but the roster that they're about to announce in the coming weeks is absolutely incredible. For me to be considered like alongside these people who I can't tell you who they are yet with so much talent, I'm sort of flabbergasted. And that's something definitely that you should keep your eyes on because they're doing something really unique and new in the food media space.
I saw Reem, a Seal post about it. She's involved, I guess.
She's on the roster too.
What is Hone doing? Is it talent representation for chefs? Or?
Yes, people in food. Food media is such a huge category. Like, there's a new food show on Netflix, like whenever you open the app. So this is like harnessing the talents of and representing a small group of chefs to further our opportunities in food media.
I love that. That's awesome. Well, we'll see if we can support them in some way as well. It sounds, I love that they're doing that. Miss Kiki, this was awesome. Thank you. And we got to meet in person at some point because we haven't. But this was really fun. So thank you.
Thank you. I love this.
Thanks for tuning into the Mies podcast. The music from the show is a remix of the song Art Mirror by an old friend, hip-hop artist Fresh Daily. For show notes and more, visit getmees.com/podcast. That's GETMEEZ.com/podcast. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love it if you can share it with your fellow entrepreneurs and culinary pros, and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. Keep innovating, don't settle, make today a little better than yesterday, and remember, it's impossible for us to learn what we think we already know. See you next time.